A multi-billion-dollar home battery scheme kicks off today, promising cheaper power.
The problem at the moment is the upfront cost of a battery is too high for too many people. We're going to fix that.
So 60, 70, 80% of the cost is being subsidised, so it's making a lot of sense for people to come back and get themselves a battery.
Walk around your neighbourhood and look up. What do you see? Solar panels, lots of them. The Australian government has just made it a lot cheaper to store the energy we're collecting on our roofs. But will this really bring Australia closer to its net zero goals? And will it make our wallets happier? Hello, I'm Rebecca Jones and welcome to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. I love a sunburnt country. Well, we all do, and it does help explain why Australian households lead the world in solar rooftop installations. But why many of us are generating solar power, far fewer are storing it. But that could soon change. The government has just announced a $2.3 billion plan to slash the cost of installing home batteries. And that's part of a bigger push to have renewables supply 82% of Australia's electricity by the end of the decade. To discuss that and what this new plan means for power bills and Australia's broader climate goals, I'm delighted to be joined today by Bloomberg's energy reporter, Keira Wright, who's based in our Sydney newsroom. Keira, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
First off, can you tell me why it is so important to the government that households like yours, like mine, have batteries? What problems are they trying to solve?
That's really the $1 million question here, Beck, or rather in this case, the $2.3 billion question. That's it. So to answer it, I'm afraid you're going to need to indulge me very quickly, just to give you a little bit of a lesson on how Australia's power grid operates. So Australia's energy grid was built to run on coal power plants, but many of those are now 40 or even 50 years old. And this age means that they often have issues and they are prone to break down. By itself, this isn't super unique, but you also need to keep in mind that over the past decade or so, Australia's power mix has undergone a pretty monumental shift. So in present times, the country has a huge amount of rooftop solar. In fact, more than 1 in 3 households across the country actually have rooftop solar panels, and most analysts estimate that's actually the highest rate in the entire world. So now that's obviously great news when, we're talking about working towards net zero, but it's also created a problem. Our power grid is built to run on coal power plants, and it can't yet handle the huge amount of rooftop solar that we now have. I promise I am getting to your original question, and to get back there, this is where batteries come in. They can allow households to store cheap solar and use it later. And that helps to flatten some really volatile price swings and ease the strain on the grid, which I think we're going to discuss a little bit later.
Australians love solar panels, don't they? But this uptake of batteries has really lagged. What has been holding it back, Keira?
It is an interesting question because, as you point out, Aussies love rooftop solar panels. So, as I mentioned earlier, in 2024, 1 in 3 Aussie households had rooftop solar. But only 1 in every 40 of those actually had a way of storing the excess energy that they generated from those solar panels. So, things like a battery, right? And if we're talking about the barriers as to why people haven't really taken up the call to install batteries, the number one biggest barrier just has to be cost. So, home batteries, they can cost over $10,000. And until now, federal support has been pretty minimal. Some states like South Australia and Victoria, they offer rebates, but it's quite patchy across the whole, country as a whole. There's also been a lot of uncertainty about payback periods. So many households, they just haven't been sure if the savings would justify the upfront cost in the long run. Essentially, though, this rebate, what it means is that hooking up a battery to your solar panels, it will become slightly more affordable. And the hope here is that it will increase the number of people who then decide to go ahead and take the plunge and make this investment.
I actually got a quote. I've got an electric vehicle and when I got it, we had a charger put in at home, and we got a quote for a battery. It was about $18,000. Was I being ripped off, Keira? Like, what do these batteries cost before the rebate? What are people looking at? Because as you say, You've got to think about how long we're going to be living in the houses that we're putting these batteries in. If the average Aussie is only living in one house or owning one house for about 7 or 8 years, is it worth it? What are they costing us?
I mean, that's right, Beck. And for that reason, it's actually really hard to kind of give you a conclusive answer, I'm afraid, because there just really are so many variables at play here that affect the cost of these batteries. But I will say that without the rebate, a standard battery, so something that's perhaps 11.5 to 13.5 kilowatt hours, that could cost you around $13,000 to maybe $18,000. So your quote was definitely on the higher end of things, but maybe it was a really good battery.
Maybe.
And, maybe it had a really large capacity. And the hope is that the bigger the battery, the more energy it can store, and then the more money that you make in the long term, selling that electricity back to the grid. So for a battery that costs you around $13,000 to $18,000 without the rebate, with a 30% discount, we're seeing people potentially save between $4,000 to maybe $5,500 for a standard battery. That being said, of course, there are cheaper and smaller batteries on the market, which could be as cheap as $6,500, and the rebate would make those come down to about $4,500 all up. But as I mentioned, those batteries aren't going to be as effective in terms of long-term savings because they can't hold as much energy. So then again, households are, forced to kind of weigh up, I guess, the cost and benefit of this upfront cost. Because in any case, this is obviously a lot of money upfront, and it's going to still remain out of reach for a lot of Aussies who are doing it pretty tough at the moment. I think that what the rebate is hoping to do is to make batteries more reachable for perhaps some of those folks that, they have a little bit of savings, maybe they own a house, and they want to invest in reducing their power bills in the long term. It is probably also worth noting that anecdotally, some folks have reported that their solar batteries have actually saved them, between a couple of $100 in a year to over $1,000. So again, the amount of money that people can save here really fluctuates quite wildly. In any case, another thing that's worth noting is that this subsidy will taper off between now and 2030. So the longer folks wait, the less cash that they will get back.
And when we come back, we'll take a look at what difference the plan will make to the bigger picture for Australia's energy future. This is the Bloomberg Australia podcast. And welcome back. You're listening to the Bloomberg Australia podcast, here with me, Rebecca Jones, and today I'm joined by Keira Wright, an energy reporter based in Bloomberg's Sydney newsroom. Keira, we've covered off so far on what the plan is going to mean for my hip pocket and yours if we decide to get one of these batteries installed at home. Now, let's blow it out a little and have a look at the bigger picture. We have seen big clean energy announcements before from the Albanese government. What is making this one different, if at all, to what we've seen in the past?
We have indeed. And look, to be completely honest, it's yet to be seen how much of a difference this specific policy will make in terms of shifting the needle. What I will say, though, is that this specific rebate is perhaps one of the most significant ones we've seen in the clean energy space that actually positions households to directly benefit. So a lot of the announcements we've seen in the past, they've been more about incentivizing companies and, trying to generate capital to invest in renewable solutions. But if this policy is successful and it works the way that it's set out to work, it hopefully will prompt a lot of folks to hook up batteries to their solar panels. And it could be a really great first step to modernising our energy grid and setting it up in a way that benefits citizens rather than big corporations. On that note, some of the folks I've spoken to, analysts and the like, have pointed out that we do need more big, large, grid-scale batteries to really make a tangible difference. And it is true, this policy doesn't really do much for that. It doesn't really do much for the energy-intensive industries that are trying to manage the risks of the renewable transition. But that being said, I think that the higher uptake of small-scale batteries would also send a strong market signal to investors, which is absolutely crucial if we're going going to decarbonise the most emissions intensive parts of the grid. So, those energy intensive industries that we just spoke about. Also, even the small scale adds up. Just look at the amount of rooftop solar that we've mobilised, which has fundamentally transformed our energy system in a pretty short period of time.
I want to pick up on something that you just mentioned there and zoom in a little on Australia's energy landscape more broadly. Keira, will these batteries, smaller scale, larger scale, are they really going to help fix these wild power price swings that we keep hearing about?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. The goal here is to flatten the energy supply and demand curve. And how that will work is that it will allow folks to hold on to the excess energy, which is generated when prices are low, and then they'll be able to sell it back to the grid when those prices rise again. So in Australia, we have this thing called a duck curve, which is a super fun name for a chart that sort of looks like a duck, in which the price of electricity, it declines around midday when demand is low and the sun is out, so there is ample opportunity to generate electricity from the sun.
Right.
And then in the evening, right, when, maybe people are heading home, they're turning on the heater, they're cooking dinner, so demand's really high. The sun is behind the clouds, it's setting, which means that there isn't a lot of opportunity to generate power from solar. There's a really big divergence in the highs and lows in terms of power pricing in one given day. So ideally, these batteries will mean a less volatile energy grid that won't need to rely so much on expensive backup.
So that is obviously good news for the power generators and also the retailers tangentially. But what about the battery makers themselves? Are there any that stand to benefit from this new law, Keira?
Yeah, I think that probably the most recognisable company that stands to benefit from an influx of folks buying batteries in Australia is probably Tesla. So Tesla sells the very popular Powerwall battery. We also have a couple of Chinese companies that are very popular providers here in Australia. Sungrow and BYD are probably the two biggest. There are also a couple of smaller providers that aren't listed. It's interesting though, I guess, when we're talking about winners and losers, because power traders also stand, I suppose, to lose from this. If we're talking about volatility in power prices being reduced, it means that there's less opportunity for them to make money off the really wild highs and lows of the power market.
If we know traders at all, they would wager a bet on two flies racing up a wall. I'm sure they'll be fine. They'll find something else. I think that they will
be okay. I agree.
Absolutely. So to recap, Keira, at the end of the day, the federal government is looking to leverage this already insane love affair that Australians have with solar panels. Something that's also unique to us is how volatile our wholesale energy market is. The hope with this new policy is that by making the home batteries a little bit cheaper, that'll mean that more of us will install them. It'll also open the door to other cool ideas like virtual power plants and so on. This is going to help even out the volatility in the wholesale price market, but also make the power supply for you and I a little bit more stable too, which can only be a good thing. Finally, I have to ask you, how does this well-intentioned plan by the federal government bode in terms of our likelihood of hitting that 82% renewables target by the year 2030, which is now 4.5 years away?
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. It's a big question, Beck, but what I will say is that we've still got a long way to go to hit that target. Last year, just 40% of the power generated in Australia came from renewables, and that amount actually didn't change from 2023. Now, the government expects the amount of renewable generation to reach 45% this year, but that's obviously still a long way off from the 82% that we're hoping by 2030. The government does hope that that amount will grow by around 3% annually every year until 2030. But again, one thing is for sure there, we probably will have to pick up our game if we're going to hit that target.
Keira Wright, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Beck.
If you found today's conversation insightful, be sure to follow the Bloomberg Australia podcast wherever you listen and check for more reading on the business of energy, including the latest reporting from Keira Wright on Bloomberg.com. Today's episode is recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri and Gadigal people. It was produced by Paul Allen and edited by Chris Burke and Ainsley Chandler. I'm Rebecca Jones, and I'll see you next week.